In its first season, Squid Game captured the world's attention with a brutal yet thoughtful commentary on modern capitalism and inequality. The show's premise revolved around a deadly competition where desperate individuals willingly participated for a shot at survival and financial salvation. Central to this narrative was the idea of choice, that even within a deeply flawed system, participants had some agency. However, by the time season 2 and 3 arrived, that principle seems to unravel. Most notably, the inclusion of a baby as a player in the game not only raises serious questions, but also shakes the core philosophy that Squid Game originally stood for. The illusion of choice is broken. One of the most consistent justifications for the brutal nature of the games has been the idea that all participants chose to be there. This gave the organizers, particularly the Frontman, a kind of moral cover. The games may be cruel, but they are fair because everyone opted in. The decision to include a baby as a contestant completely breaks that logic. A baby cannot choose. A baby cannot understand or consent. The whole framework of moral justification that the game prides itself on begins to collapse under this contradiction. While the writers likely intended this to be symbolic, perhaps representing inherited wealth or societal inequality from birth, the execution leaves much to be desired. The problem is not the metaphor itself, but that it undermines the internal logic the story was built on. Symbolism versus narrative coherence. There is a fine balance between making a symbolic point and maintaining narrative consistency. The introduction of the baby is clearly meant to provoke thought about generational wealth, privilege, and systemic injustice, and in theory, it aligns with the show's ongoing critique of capitalism. The baby, after all, is portrayed as someone who reaps benefits without ever needing to struggle, in stark contrast to the other players. But symbolism should work in harmony with story mechanics. In this case, the metaphor overshadows and disrupts the structure of the game itself, with viewers are left asking why this scenario is even allowed in a supposedly rule-bound competition. The message is weakened. Good storytelling let meaning emerge through the narrative, not at the expense of it. The Frontman's moral dilemma feels forced. In season 1, the Frontman was a fascinating character, someone who enforced the brutal rules while believing, or at least pretending to believe, that the system was fair. But by season 3, his actions seem increasingly contradictory. His willingness to allow a baby into the games, supposedly to test Gi-yeon's morality, feels manipulative, not only in the context of the game, but also in the eyes of the audience. We are told that the Frontman is trying to break Gi-yeon's belief in human decency, pushing him to make an impossible choice. But the fact that this challenge is so overtly rigid cheapens the outcome. If the test is designed to be unwinnable or morally corrupt from the start, then Gi-yeon's philosophical style isn't truly tested, it's just manipulated. The scene loses the emotional and thematic power it could have had. Gi-yeon's victory, philosophical but hollow. When Gi-yeon chooses not to kill the baby, it's meant to be a triumphant moral victory, a moment that symbolizes his belief in humanity even under impossible circumstances. The Frontman is defeated, not through violence, but through faith and compassion. In principle, it's a powerful ending, but because the scenario feels so contrived, the emotional impact doesn't land as effectively as it could. Instead of rooting for Gi-yeon, viewers are left puzzled by the game's logic. Was this really the only way to test his humanity? Couldn't there have been a more grounded, believable scenario to challenge his ethic? In trying to create a dramatic moral climax, the writers veer too far into abstraction. The result is a moment that's meant to be inspiring, but instead feels artificial. The core message, still relevant, but blunt. There's no doubt that Squid Game continues to explore vital themes like class struggle, economic inequality, the illusion of meritocracy. These are more relevant than ever. The show still has moments that effectively reflect the harsh realities of modern life, where power and privilege often dictates outcome. However, the storytelling in season 2 and 3 relies increasingly on heavy-handed symbolism. The nuanced social commentary of season 1, where characters' personal stories reveal the cruelty of the system, has given way to broader, more theatrical metaphors. The baby isn't just a character, it's a symbol. The Frontman isn't just an antagonist, he's a mouthpiece for a philosophy. And when everything becomes a symbol, the story risks losing its emotional authenticity. Conclusion: a game that forgot its own rules. Squid Game began as a tightly constructed story about people caught in an unforgiving system, a world where even cruelty was dressed in the language of fairness. But by season 3, the show seems to forget the very logic that made it so compelling. The inclusion of the baby as a player may have been intended to deepen the show's social commentary, but it ultimately weakens the story. The principle of choice, fairness, and moral agency, which was central to the show's impact, are compromised for the sake of symbolism. In the end, Squid Game tries to say something meaningful, but the message is muddied by a narrative that no longer follows its own rules. The game, once shocking and thought-provoking, now feels more like a performance, one that's lost the very principle it claimed to stand on. I do hope that you enjoyed this this video, do like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to leave a comment below. See you in the next one.